Hey, welcome! Today we're going to decode something that's a huge part of being human: optimism. I mean, this is a trait that literally shapes our health, our decisions, how our brains are wired, the whole shebang. So yeah, let's get right into the science behind looking on the bright side. You've heard this a million times, right? But what if I told you the answer has almost nothing to do with your personality and everything to do with your genes, your brain chemistry, and some really wild stuff happening inside your head? We're talking about something way, way deeper than just a simple outlook on life. All right, so let's really get into it. To even begin to understand optimism from a scientific point of view, we've got to separate it from its very close cousin, hope. Now, they might feel like the same thing, but believe me, in the lab, they are totally different beasts. Okay, so here's the key difference. Optimism, that's more of a general kind of passive belief that, yeah, things will probably work out. But hope is active. It's a process. It's not just sitting back and believing things will be okay. It's about rolling up your sleeves and actually planning for them to work out.
This is all based on a theory from psychologist C.R. Snyder, and he said hope has two essential ingredients. First, there's agency thinking. Think of this as your willpower, that deep-down belief that I can do this. But just having willpower isn't enough, right? You also need pathway thinking. That's the way power, the ability to actually come up with strategies to get to your goals. So hope is really the magic that happens when willpower and way power come together.
So that begs the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Where does this all come from? Are we just born optimistic, or is it something we learn? Well, to get to the bottom of that, scientists went to one of their go-to tools for these kinds of questions: twin studies.
Yeah, back in 2009, there was this landmark study. They looked at thousands of twins all over the age of 50. And here's the genius of it. By comparing identical twins who have the exact same DNA to fraternal twins who only share about half, researchers can start to pull apart what comes from our genes, nature, and what comes from our life experiences, nurture.
And wow, check out what they found. About 36%, a little over a third, of how optimistic we are can be traced back to our genes. That's a pretty big deal. But look at this. The majority, 64%, came from these non-shared environmental factors. That's just a fancy way of saying all the unique stuff that happens to you, but maybe not your sibling. So yeah, your genes might give you a nudge in one direction, but your actual life journey, that's what really shapes your outlook. Okay, so it's partly genetic. Got it. But what does that actually look like inside our heads? How does that genetic code translate into, a brighter outlook? Let's pop the hood and look at the brain's optimism engine. So, get this. It turns out our brains are not these perfectly logical computers we might think they are. They actually have this built-in good news filter. It's like they're designed to pay more attention to the good stuff than the bad. And the fuel for this filter? A little chemical you've probably heard of, dopamine. There was this incredible study that really showed this in action. Researchers gave people a drug called L-Dopa, which boosts dopamine, and it completely changed how they processed new information. So when they got good news, like, hey, your risk of something bad happening is actually lower than you thought, their brains immediately updated their beliefs. Boom. But when they got bad news, their brains pretty much just shrugged and ignored it. It's like a one-way street for information, hardwired to let the good news in.
But wait, it gets even cooler. It's not just brain chemistry. A totally groundbreaking study using fMRI scans, the ones that watch your brain in real time, found something deeper. They discovered that when optimistic people think about the future, their brains, they literally think alike. They light up in these incredibly similar patterns.
The researchers summed it all up with this amazing line, which is a play on a famous quote from Tolstoy. Essentially, what they're saying is that optimists all seem to be plugged into the same neural network when they imagine the future. But less optimistic people, their brains all imagine the future in their own unique way. And this isn't just a cute metaphor. It's a real physical pattern. And it might just explain why optimists tend to have stronger friendships and social ties. They might actually be on the same brainwave.
Okay, let's take a step back. We've got this trait that's partly in our genes. It's wired into our brain chemistry. So what? What does this actually mean for our lives? Well, one of the biggest, most studied consequences is our physical health.
Now, this data comes from a huge analysis of tons of different studies, and it shows something really, really interesting. Look at that first bar. Optimism has a pretty strong link to what we call subjective health. Basically, how healthy you feel. You report less pain, fewer symptoms. That kind of makes sense, right? But check out the second bar. there's also a real, measurable connection to objective health. We're talking about things like mortality rates, how well your immune system works, stuff doctors can actually measure. And that's the key takeaway here. Optimism isn't just about feeling better, it seems to be linked with actually being better. But of course, it can't all be good news. There's a dark side. This built-in tendency to always expect the best can really mess with us. It can lead us right off a cliff thanks to a cognitive glitch known as the optimism bias. Basically, this is our good news filter going into overdrive. It's why we think we're less likely to get sick, or get into an accident, or have our marriage fail, even when we know the stats. At the same time, we're sure we're going to live forever and be a huge success. I mean, this is one of the most common and powerful biases we humans have. And one of the biggest ways this bias trips us up day in and day out is something called the planning fallacy. And I'm willing to bet this is going to sound very familiar to you.
Let's be honest. Have you ever done any of these? That home renovation you thought would take a weekend and it took a month and twice the budget? Or that project at work you told your boss would be done by noon, but you're still working on it at 6? Or just thinking, I can get so much done today, and then you don't? Yep, that is the planning fallacy in action. It's our optimism bias whispering in our ear, don't worry, this time will be different, even when all the evidence says it won't be.
Okay, wow, we have covered a ton of ground here. We've gone from our DNA to brain chemistry with dopamine, all the way to why our home projects go over budget. So what's the big picture? What's the one thing you should really take away from all this? All right, here it is, the bottom line. First, optimism isn't just a mindset, it's a complex trait that's literally rooted in our biology, our genes, and our brain chemistry. Second, this natural wiring seems to give us some very real advantages when it comes to our physical health. But third, and this is a big but, it's a double-edged sword. That same wiring creates a bias that can make us, well, pretty bad at planning for reality.
And that leaves us with one last really interesting question to chew on. Remember how we started? We talked about the difference between passive optimism and active hope. So, if our built-in biological optimism can sometimes lead us astray, what about hope? If hope is an active tool, a mix of willpower and good strategy, is that something we can actually learn? Can we train ourselves to get better at it, to build a kind of positivity that's more realistic and more resilient? Definitely something to think about.